Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a developer by developing your skills, your mindset, your network, your habits, and more. I'm Peter Elbaum, one of your co-hosts, and today our guest is Chris Ferdinandi. Chris helps people learn vanilla JavaScript at gomakethings.com and believes there's a simpler, more resilient way to make things for the web. His Developer Tips newsletter is read by thousands of developers each weekday. Chris and I talked about his journey, how to make a career transition to development, how Chris found his niche in vanilla JavaScript and ended up working for himself, and much more. This was a great conversation. I learned a bunch, and I know you will too. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Chris Ferdinandi. Chris, welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here. I've really been looking forward to this. I'm wondering, just to start off, if you could tell a little bit about who you are for those of our audience who might not be familiar with you and your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Chris Ferdinandi. I help people learn vanilla JavaScript. My whole thing is that I believe there's a simpler, more resilient way to build things for the web than maybe some of the more popular best practices might have you believe. I publish a daily newsletter with tips on how to do that over at gomakethings.com.
Great. Yeah, I love the newsletter. I'm a subscriber and highly recommend it. The Vanilla.js take is super interesting to me, so I'm sure we'll get into that. But kind of as more backstory, I guess, I'm curious if you could say a little bit about how you got into doing this in the first place. I know you're a career changer like me, like a lot of our audience. And so how did you start building for the web and how did you make it your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story kind of starts all the way back in college. I'm not really one for long-term plans. I have kind of a bit of a Winnie the Pooh-esque, just kind of bumble around from one place to the other as my interests take me kind of person. So I cycled through like 4 or 5 majors in college before I finally landed on anthropology, which is super interesting to learn about, but not something I actually wanted to do for the rest of my life. It involves a lot of time away from home, and I'm kind of a homebody, so just not really a great fit. And so senior year, I kind of fell into this internship in human resources, and I liked it well enough to keep doing it after college. So my time in HR eventually kind of found me working in the training and development organization at a tech company, where my primary role was career development training for software engineers. So a lot of folks in kind of the engineering wing of this company struggled with things like figuring out what they wanted to do next, identifying a clear career path, even like landing roles internally. There was a lot of kind of challenges around that at the company I worked at. Most of what I focused my time on in my last 3 years or so in HR was on learning, education, and career stuff. At one point near the very end, I had gotten a new manager, and he and I were experimenting with some kind of, at the time, innovative ways to approach internal learning and development. Now, I think with everybody working remote, it's kind of just how things are done. But at the time, we were like, what if instead of like having to sit 30 people in a room for 2 days to train them, you could just deliver it over the internet at our technology company. So we were playing around with some ideas, and we wanted to get like a prototype set up. And I had, at the time, I had an HR blog. So I had already been kind of playing around with CSS and HTML and a little bit of PHP, but nothing like I wasn't like a programmer. But it was just enough to kind of like modify my theme a little bit so it looked the way I wanted. But that was enough to get me known as the guy who knows tech in HR, which is kind of strange. But we're kind of playing around with this idea. We went to our IT company, our IT department rather, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we can do it, but it'll cost $250,000. It'll take a year, and it probably won't look the way you want," which didn't really make sense for we were just trying to like test some ideas. So then we went to an outside agency, having no idea how much external development resources really cost. And like, oh yeah, no, we can do that in like 6 weeks. It'll only cost $500,000. And we're like, well, that's not going to work for like a proof of concept either. And so this is where the question that changed my entire career happened. My manager looks at me and he goes, can you do it? And I looked him dead in the eye and I very confidently told him, absolutely not. That is way above my skill level. And then he goes, well, can you learn? And I said, probably not, but I'll give it a shot. So I just kind of like disappeared for 2 weeks and went into this like Stack Overflow abyss of like digging through lots of questions and answers and trying to figure out how to hack WordPress into this like semi-passable video streaming app thing. And at the end, it worked kind of ish. It was like this hacky vaporware kind of thing, but it was functional enough that we could demo it. And I was absolutely hooked. That was, for me, that was the moment. I did that and I was like, I never want to do this HR nonsense again. This is my career. Because I had been doing career development training for like 3 years before that, I just took everything I knew from my HR career and pivoted that into trying to get a job in web development. But that was the moment for me. That's how I switched careers. And then it was just 2 years of resumes and networking and failed interviews, lots of failed interviews, realizing like these are like clear holes in my skill set that I need to patch up. And we can dig into like what that process looks like if you want. But that was the moment. That was the kind of the catalyst for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I honestly thought you were going to say that when your boss asked you if you could do it, you said yes. So I kind of love that it was a no. I think that will honestly resonate a lot more with our folks out there who have a lot of doubt. I have a lot of doubt still, and so I think that's pretty real. So I like that, but I like that you were willing to try anyway. I think that's super important. So yeah, I'd love to talk about kind of what happened next. So you'd hacked some WordPress. You wanted to try and get a job in this. You mentioned that you'd used your HR knowledge to pivot. So what does it look like to use HR knowledge to switch careers? Is that structuring your own kind of curriculum and teaching yourself? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So there's a few things. And a lot of them are kind of, I don't want to say hacks, but it's like, it's one of those, like, once you know how this, no, I guess it's technically a hack. So just to put this in like coder terms, once you understand how the system works, you can work around it. You can like, the limitations and you can like build within those constraints. So one of the big ones is, back in the olden times, before you and I were born, resumes were a paper thing. And then the internet happened and then monster.com happened. And employers loved it because they're like, oh, cool, we can get all these resumes from on the internet. And that was good for a little while until the economy went south and people started applying for jobs that they weren't qualified for. And then HR suddenly went from getting like 100 resumes on paper to 1,000, more than they could ever like realistically go through in real time. And so vendors started offering software that scans resumes and just pulls out the ones that are the best fit. And the way they do that primarily is through keyword matching. So it's very common for people to send resumes and just never hear back. And the reason you don't hear back most of the time isn't because someone looked at your resume and decided you were trash. It probably didn't get seen by a person at all. Some computer decided you were trash and never sent it to a person. And the thing about this, the way to kind of work around this system, so you don't want to game it so that you're applying for jobs that you're not qualified for. That's not a good idea. But most recruiters who recruit for technical roles are not developers themselves. They're specialists in recruiting and they're working with a hiring manager who probably knows a fair bit about tech, but not nearly as much as the person they're trying to hire, because managers often know less technical knowledge than their employees do. So they'll get a list of like a job description, and then recruiters will just copy paste the buzzwords from that job description. And a lot of times they won't know alternate phrases for things. So when you're applying for a job, it's really useful to customize your resume to the job. And like the most important thing you can do here in a world where these resume filtering softwares exist is to tailor the specific words you use based on the job description. So, you know, if if someone says looking for experience in React and you have React experience, don't say you have framework experience. Copy the phrase from the job description and drop it in your resume. It's more likely to get picked up as a match and get sent along. And so the more of kind of these overlaps you have, the better off you're going to be. So that's a big one. The other, I guess, kind of like dirty little secret about the recruiting industry is getting like roles approved internally at companies is usually really hard. The bigger the company, the worse it is. There's usually like layers of signatures that need to happen and budget approvals and all this kind of thing. And so if I'm a hiring manager and I want a new role, or someone leaves and I need to fill that position, it can sometimes take 6 months to get that new spot approved, even though I'm like replacing someone we already had. And the because of that, you can't, the hiring manager can't even advertise that position on the company's website, or like the recruiter won't start interviewing people until it's approved. Now, if I'm a hiring manager, I don't want to wait 6 months and then start interviewing people. I want to make sure I can hit the ground running as fast as possible. So what will often happen is hiring managers will start networking and looking for people before it's ever posted anywhere. They'll tell their employees, like, if you know someone who might be a good fit, let me know. We'll send them to the recruiter. And as soon as we get approval, we can start bringing them in. And so the unfortunate side effect of this is that a lot of times by the time you see a job description posted somewhere, there's already maybe 3 to 5 finalists in their second round of interviews for that job before it's even made public. And so this is like a really long kind of roundabout way of saying networking is probably literally the single best thing you can do to find and get jobs. And that was a big part of my process. So networking, I think, is uncomfortable for a lot of people because they think of it as like you go to a meetup and you awkwardly say, this is who I am. Here's my card. Here's what I do. You know, it doesn't have to be like that. So I hate that kind of networking. I think most people do. Mm-hmm. Some people are really good at it. They usually work in sales.
Yeah.
But so the trick there is to not do that. Just like, if it sucks, just don't do it. That's like, for me, that's a big part of my lifestyle, which I fully acknowledge is like a very privileged kind of take that I, as a cishet white dude from like a middle-class upbringing can do that not everybody can. But, the networking piece, the big eye opener for me there was that networking doesn't have to be going to networking events. What I ended up doing was I made a list of companies I wanted to work at, types of jobs I wanted, especially early on in your career. If you don't really know, like, web development is a broad field. So it could be front end, it could be back end, could be mostly CSS and HTML, it could be more JavaScript stuff. And so I identified kind of the types of things I wanted and the companies I wanted to work for. And then I looked through my network to identify people that worked at those places or in those roles. So that could be your real life network if you know people who do web development or who work at certain companies. For me, honestly, a lot of it was social media. Like, Twitter was still new enough at the time that it was like that bar where like everybody kind of knows everybody, even if you haven't chatted. And so I reached out to a few kind of up and coming names in the web development space just to talk to them. Like Brad Frost, who wrote the book on atomic design and does a lot of consulting around design systems now. He was early in his career, but really making a name for himself as an RWD, a responsive web design guy. So I reached out to him, and the question here is, can I just have like a 15-minute chat with you to learn a little bit more about what you do? Because 15 minutes is an easy yes. I never had anybody say no. I did have a couple people ignore me, but almost everybody says yes. And in the before times, or like if you live near people, you can do like an in-coffee kind of thing. And that, I'll buy you coffee, my treat, is an easy yes. But now it's really easy to just do quick Zoom chats too. So I did a lot of those. And when you get on these calls, you're not saying, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you know of anything? you're asking some variation of just a few questions. So, what does a typical day-to-day look like for you? Are there any critical skills that someone working in your job or at your company needs to have? And the third one I always asked was, are there any big changes in your industry or the web industry or whatever? You tailor this based on who you're talking to. The you see coming that are going to dramatically change how you work. And these three questions get at a few things. If you're interested in working at a specific company, they give you a really good sense of what it's like to work there and what types of skills someone who's applying there probably needs. If you're just trying to figure out if you'd, like to work as a design system specialist or a JavaScript developer, it gives you a really good sense of what the day-to-day is like and the types of skills you might need there. And the future question is really awesome at helping you flag up-and-coming trends that you should pay attention to that will give you a big edge against other people when you apply for jobs. So at the time when I did this, responsive web design was still like new. And knowing just a little bit more about it than the people who were even interviewing me in some cases made me seem like someone who was, I don't want to say more competent than I was, although that's probably true, but someone who kind of had an interest and was eager to learn and kind of kept abreast of what was happening. That definitely helped. So the other piece of this networking process is at the end of these little coffee chats, as I like to call them, you ask, you might casually mention during the conversation that you're looking for work or making a career change, or you're not overtly asking them for a job. You're just kind of casually mentioning it. And then at the end, I always like to ask if they know, if 2 or 3 other people that might be useful for me to talk to based on what I've told them about myself, that, career changer, thinking about working here, whatever. And the idea here is that you kind of create this like spiderweb network. So the more you do this, the bigger your network kind of branches out. And by casually mentioning that you're looking for a job without overtly asking for one, when one of these things opens up where, someone's hiring internally, but it's not approved or hasn't been posted yet, you're someone that they may think of and let you know about it. Or if you see something, that like a job actually gets posted, you can email that person and be like, hey, I saw this job. Do you know who the hiring manager is? Can you put me in touch? Could you help me help me have a chat just to learn a little bit more about the team or, something. It's kind of like a little hack to bypass the normal process. And I always feel kind of crummy about this because it feels like one of those, like, it's not what you know, it's who you know kind of things, which is true. And it's an unfortunate, it kind of pulls back the curtain on this idea that our industry is a meritocracy because, it's not.
Right.
It can be in certain situations, but there's a lot of other nonsense that goes on in this process too. But yeah, those were the biggest things for me. So just networking a ton and kind of that ridiculous, bypass the interview, bypass the resume system kind of thing. Those two are literally like the things that that guided most of my process. And then the other thing, as a quick aside, I know a lot of folks hold off on applying for jobs because they don't feel ready. And apply now. Like, it doesn't matter if you feel ready or not. Interviewing is kind of an art in and of itself. And there is a very good chance that if you wait until you feel ready, you will go in for that dream job and you'll bomb the interview because you have no experience with interviewing. So it's better to fail a job early when your skills are garbage anyways, and get that experience, than wait until the perfect job and blow the interview then. And the other really useful thing about doing that is I failed so many interviews, and I like every time someone asks a question that is very clearly the thing that sinks the interview for me, it's okay, I need to go like spend a few weeks like learning about that thing or figuring out how to like answer this question more effectively or whatever. So yeah, I'll shut up. I've been rambling for a long time. I'm sure you have some follow-ups. I'm so sorry.
No, that's all really, really good stuff. I think that's going to be super useful to our audience. And what Aaron, my co-host, and I end up telling people all the time is more or less a version of what you said, which is that if you're just kind of putting your resume out there and crossing your fingers, hoping for the best, it's probably not going to go that well. It sounds like you kind of learned this through just your background in HR, through personal experience.
Yep.
And just looking through your LinkedIn, it kind of seems like on the networking piece, at the end of the day, you ended up with an internal transfer to doing web development. Is that right?
No. Well, yes, sort of. So I was at EMC, who's now part of Dell at the time, and that's where I was doing all my HR stuff. I actually looked for internal roles, and once I started doing there's a couple pieces to this. So I looked internally, and I didn't find anything that actually fit very well. A lot of the exciting development work that they had was farmed out to agencies, and then their internal folks just kind of did little like nudge and tweak kind of stuff. Their tech was not, they're very hardware based. And so there wasn't a lot of like software development going on at the time. I think that's changed a lot because they've become a lot more focused on like the cloud. But at the time, it wasn't really a thing. So what I ended up doing was because I was within the HR department, a lot of my focus became working on kind of experimental learning tech. I was able to kind of put that as my experience on my resume, and so my job title ended up reflecting that. Just in the end before I left, but my first real web development job was at Constant Contact, where I actually only lasted 3 or 4 months, and we can unpack that if you want to, because there was a pretty fun lesson in there. But yeah, when I interviewed, it's the funny thing about interviewing, right? It's like people will, so there's a lesson here. So the big thing with interviewing is, and again, this is totally situational, but it's really tempting when you're interviewing early on and you're going for that first career to just grab that first job that you get. And a lot of times you'll hear stuff that kind of gives you pause or seems like a red flag. It often is. I can remember one role I interviewed for, I was asking, what their approach to mobile was. And the person I was interviewing with was like, oh yeah, that mobile thing, that's a fad. That's going to go away in a couple months. And clearly that has not been the case, but I literally instantly entered the interview. I'm like, I don't think this is going to be the right team for me. And we kind of called the interview off there. One of the other things, so like Constant Contact, for example, they had a better learning culture than any company I have ever worked at. Every Friday was like a lunch and learn. They constantly brought in like outside speakers to talk about things, all during company hours. It was amazing. Constant Contact was pretty far from my house, so it ended up being like a 3-hour round trip with traffic.
Wow.
But I didn't know that when I interviewed because I'd go during like off hours, and it was only like 45 minutes, and that was totally doable. But during the interview process, I asked about remote work, and I was told that while this remote role is in person, we can talk about remote work once you get settled into it. It's like a possibility. And so I got settled into the role, and I asked, no, not yet. Got settled into the role a little bit more, not yet. And then finally at one point, I'm like, so when do you think when do you think yet will be that we can actually talk about this? And my manager was like, oh well, yeah, remote work's not really something we do here. It's like, well, why did you tell me we could talk about it if we can't? So literally a day later, this dude that I used to work with in HR had joined some other company and sent me an email like, hey, do you know of any front-end developers? We're hiring, and I think you know a lot of them now. And I was like, oh, Vic, me, this is not working out. I'm ready to I'm ready to make a jump. And so that was that. That was my shortest career stint. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. So the first is, I probably should have been a little bit more like tuned into the fact that they're like, well, this isn't really a remote role, but we can talk about it. That's like more of like a verbal kind of, it's a non-commitment. And I should have been like, if this was important to me, and it was, because I had been working mostly remote before that. And it's something I enjoyed. We talked a little before this call about how I have ADHD. And so for me, in office environments are wildly distracting and very disruptive to my work. So for me, remote is actually like a productivity boon. I get so much more done remotely. But the the other thing is like your circumstances may be such that you need the job and you need the money right now, and you just kind of have to put up with a less than ideal situation. I fully recognize that. I was fortunate that I didn't have to, and I got an early out. But one of the biggest pieces of career guidance I always hear is like, oh, you need to stay at a place for at least 1 to 2 years, or you're going to look like a job hopper. And if you're changing jobs every 3 months, like 5 times in a row, maybe the problem is maybe it's not. I mean, maybe you just work in toxic places. There's a lot of toxic places in our industry, and there are a lot of expectations around people, particularly not white people, to just deal with nonsense. So I don't want to trivialize that. But I also think that advice is bad. Like if you're in a bad environment, it's better for both you and the company you're working at to cut out early. Just recognize it for what it is. And if you have another option, I don't think there's anything wrong with taking that. Sometimes it actually works out as a really good thing. So yeah, again, these are really like fuzzy suggestions because everybody's journey is different. I'm very cognizant of the fact that, as a white dude, I can say and do things that, women and people of color can't always. But yeah, just as general guidance, sticking around in a bad situation is not, just so you can get that I've been here for a year thing is not always the best advice.
Right. Yeah. And especially with a first development job, what I've seen repeated is that, once you've got that first role, your value in the market is all of a sudden way higher because, and it's kind of arbitrary, right? It's kind of silly, but it's like once you've had a role, it's like you're not completely unproven, and you're not, in my view is that I assume the way companies think about it is that you're not as risky at this point because it's like, okay, you've proven you can do this as a job. And so, yeah, I think, for example, I only stayed at my first job for 10 months and that felt about right for me. It was using a lot of legacy technology. I wasn't learning the way I wanted to. And so at that point it was like, let's keep moving onward and upward. I'm totally okay with that.
So one other thing that it occurred to me as you were talking, is, so I'm from the Northeast, and we are, for people who aren't from over here, we are very blunt in the Northeast. We're just very direct with how we speak, to the point that a lot of people from other parts of the country sometimes think I'm a jerk when they first meet me because I'm very direct. But one of the nice things that happened with that is when I was interviewing after kind of leaving that short 3-month stint at Constant Contact, one of the big questions is like, oh, you've only been here 3 months. Like, what's up? And I was just really honest. I wasn't like rude or disparaging of Constant Contact. I always framed it as a communication issue. Like we didn't communicate clearly with each other about like I assumed one thing, they assumed another. We were both wrong. But I was just very honest about it. Like I had expected that, we would be able to move into partial remote. We weren't able to. It's not working out for me because I'm spending a lot of time in the car that I could actually be spending doing development work. Like I was literally developing like wrist and knee pain from driving like stop and go traffic, which was not fun. That just went over really, really, really well. Again, fully recognizing my, kind of privileges around being able to do this, but I think people sometimes feel like interviewing has to be this kind of like, it's like this dance, or like you're both trying to kind of like screw the other one over. And it doesn't have to be like that. If you're dealing with an interviewer or a company that's a red flag that like that whole experience once you work there is going to be garbage too. So I was very honest during the interview process, and I was in that role for like, you looked at my LinkedIn more recently than I have, Peter, but I think it was like 6 or 7 years. It was a pretty long run, like 5, something like that. It was the longest I've ever been in any one job.
Yeah, I think that's also a great point, which is that like I'm very in favor of let's all just be really transparent, because if you're in a bad fit with a job, it's going to become apparent probably pretty quickly, and then everyone's wasted their time, and you may not be there a year if you take our advice on this, but you'll be there a while as you look for your next job. So, yeah, that's all really good. I'm curious, at what point did the emphasis on vanilla JS come in? And also tangentially, I'm curious if you managed to avoid frameworks in your employment up to this point.
Yeah, I've somehow managed to almost entirely avoid them, which I know is not necessarily the reality now, but yeah, I somehow avoided that. I learned on jQuery. JavaScript was really hard for me to learn, like really, really hard, painfully difficult. HTML and CSS made a lot of sense to me. JavaScript just blew my mind. And so jQuery kind of helped me get in there because it has really great documentation and a very consistent API. And so stuff that was really confusing, jQuery kind of made a little less confusing. I started learning at this really awesome time where ES5 had just come out. And so it stole a lot of stuff from jQuery, but a lot of the like, oh, you got to do this in one browser and that in another one stuff was starting to fall away. Standards were actually starting to become a thing again, which was great. So I was working on jQuery, and I could write code, but in interviews, I would get asked questions about like kind of the underlying ideas behind some of my jQuery code, and I wouldn't know how to answer them. And so I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I started taking some of these like scripts I had written in jQuery just as learning projects and converting them over into vanilla JavaScript. And around the same time, I read an article from Dave Rupert on how he ripped jQuery out of his WordPress blog and increased his page load time by decreased his page load time by like 3 seconds. It was a lot faster. And I had seen Jake Archibald from Google give a talk about improving rendering time. So performance was like really on my mind as well. So I started kind of making all these connections. And then because I had a blog, I just started writing about them. And then I noticed that people seemed really interested in just looking at my analytics. This like how to do this jQuery thing without jQuery was becoming, kind of increasingly popular. And so that kind of started this whole path for me where I realized that a lot of the stuff that used to require jQuery didn't, was just as easy to write and was a lot more performant. And it just, for me, I was someone who really felt strongly about the performance aspect because it's a user and usability issue. So it started as this kind of like hobby and then turned into this almost like mission for me to kind of help make jQuery obsolete. No disrespect to John, Resig, what he built is incredible and it paved the cow path for what we have now, and the modern web would not exist without it. But, it hit a point where it did its job and now the platform had taken over. And so I was really focused on teaching people that.
All right. So you had this kind of growing interest in vanilla JS, but that doesn't necessarily translate to working for yourself. So I'm curious about what the story is behind how you ended up doing this full time.
Yeah, great question. So I always, I shouldn't say always, but for a long while, I knew that I eventually wanted to have my own thing. And I think like a lot of people, my original foray into that was freelancing. So I had a day job. I was kind of doing some side gig, side hustle kind of stuff. And I had an awesome client that I absolutely loved. And then there were some internal leadership changes. And it turned into kind of like a frustrating situation for me. And in that moment, I kind of decided I was done with the freelance thing. It just was not working for me. I really love working with developers, and I knew that was kind of a thing that I really wanted to do more of. And so I decided that I was going to go down the product path. So I didn't really have any idea what that would look like, but I hired a business coach, Jonathan Stark, over at jonathanstark.com. Him and I kind of started working on figuring out what that might look like. And it was a very winding path. So at the time, I was really focused on web performance. And so, for the longest time, I was like, okay, I'm going to be the web performance guy. But no one really, not that people didn't care about that, but they didn't care about it enough to like spend money on it.
Sure.
And so I tried a whole bunch of things. It was like a year-long process of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what would stick. When I first met Jonathan, the very first thing he said to me was like, "Oh, I know you. You're the Vanilla.js guy." And you think like that should have been a light bulb moment for me, but it did not click. And so then, one day about like a year in, I was looking at my analytics, just kind of trying to figure out what the heck what the heck I'm doing with my life. And I noticed that like 8 of the 10 most popular articles on my site were how to do jQuery thing without jQuery, some variation of that. That's when it all kind of like clicked and came full circle for me. So I ended up writing an ebook called Ditching jQuery that was all about how to do it was basically like the ebook equivalent of what that You Might Not Need jQuery website eventually became, which is not by me, but is still a pretty awesome resource. It didn't really sell all that great. It actually was kind of a flop. And so then I thought it might be priced too high. It was like $100 and something bucks, which is not unheard of for like an ebook plus some other stuff kind of resource. It was just an ebook. That would be absurd, but there was like a bunch of other stuff in there. And so I ended up breaking it up into 5 or 6 smaller parts. So it's same content broken up into smaller pieces. And I had it priced so that if you bought all 5 or 6 of them, you'd get a discount. And with that discount, it ended up being the same price as what the book had been before. And for some reason, that was like the secret thing that made everything click. All of a sudden, it started like really kind of taking off. Same content, just ultimately the same price, just packaged a little differently. That was kind of the start of the whole thing. I'd kind of had in my mind that if I'd sold $3,000 worth of books, I'd be happy. And that came and went, and then it just kept growing from there. I had people reach out and ask if I had books on other topics. And then I had people reach out and say, hey, like, these are great, but I learned better with video. Do you have videos? Which I didn't. And so that kind of started this whole like, all right, let me make video versions of these. And then from there, I had people who reached out, or students who would talk to me, and they'd be like, I know exactly how to get an element from the DOM. I've got like query selector locked down. I've got like the class list API locked down. But when I sit down and actually build apps, I'm really lost about how to start. Like they can jump into projects and they can convert existing scripts, but that greenfield stuff was kind of tough for folks. So that led to a whole series of workshops that are project focused, where we literally take like, here's your project statement. Go ahead and build a project. And we start really small and we work our way up to bigger stuff. And by the end, people feel like they can actually build things, which is cool. It's just kind of been this evolving process over the last, I want to say 6 years now.
Yeah. So the jQuery book was, I don't know, let's say 2016-ish, or when did that start selling?
Let me do some quick math. So -6. Yeah, so that would have been around 2016, maybe 2015, something like that. It's been so long now that I think I've been saying it's been about 6 years for a couple of years, so it may be closer to 8 at this point. But yeah, that was somewhere in the mid 20-teens is when that all happened. And it's been a really, really kind of slow evolution. So I had this thing that I was doing with my day job for actually a majority of the time I was in my last day job. Like the other really nice thing about products is you create them and you have to market them. And for me, that's what my daily newsletter is. But it's also a bunch of other things too, and we can talk about that. But I'm not actively like, or I wasn't, actively constantly like buying ads, doing all this sort of thing. I made these things, and then once you make them, they kind of become, or they can become kind of this nice passive thing that grows slowly over time. So, so it started off as like, oh, okay, cool. This is, it's like $100 a month or so. So, all right, this is great. This is like, a tank of gas or groceries or beer money. I'm not really a beer drinker, like coffee money. And then it evolved into like, oh, cool. This is vacation money. This is great. And then somewhere along the line, it was like, wow, this is more than I was making in my first job out of college. This is kind of nuts. And then at some point it became, like I've officially doubled my annual income from this product thing. And so about like 3 or 4 months ago, I took the leap and actually just like quit my day job, to do this full time. So that was kind of a scary thing. One of the really nice, I guess, benefits of the pandemic, or silver lining, let's call it that. I wouldn't call it a benefit, but one of the silver linings of the pandemic is we did nothing. My wife and I were exceptionally cautious. And so when you don't eat takeout like you used to, and you don't go on vacation for 2 years, you can bank a bunch of money. We were able to build up a pretty good amount of runway. So this is my job now, which is really cool. It means I have a lot more time to focus on, actually building stuff, which is cool. Because when you're trying to do that with a day job, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge. And here we are.
Sure. Yeah, it's super exciting. I think, obviously, we're not talking about me because you're the guest here, but I did something similar. And I think the pandemic was such an interesting catalyst for people to maybe do things that they've been putting off, or to reassess work situations or whatever. So that's been really interesting for me to hear about. I have so many questions about that. I'm curious, was it just mostly a financial decision, or was it also kind of to do with your job? I know for me, I was kind of getting a bit tired of what I was doing, and I knew I wanted to work for myself anyway.
So it was a few things. So this is something I'd been building to for a long time. I always knew that I eventually just wanted to have my own thing. And I know people kind of knock on like the idea of a lifestyle business or whatever, but like candidly, my goal with my business has always been to make more money and work less. Like I am someone who enjoys leisure.
Me too.
I really wanted more time I wanted less time working and more kind of independence. And so I always knew that was kind of the eventual end goal. My last job, I was in that role for, I want to say like 7 years. It's like the longest I've ever been in any role. I'd say I honestly probably hit the like, I'm not really learning anything new in this job, maybe like 2 or 3 years in, but it paid well. I got to work from home. It was, it gave me time to continue to grow this business on the side. Just for where I was in my life, that was totally fine. Like I know, for certain people who are really like career motivated, they would have left long before I did. So it was primarily financially motivated in that like, okay, we're actually at a place where we can do this. The job had also kind of shifted a bit. We had a new VP come in who was making a lot of changes with the way the group I was part of was functioning, and I was being asked to kind of move into a capacity in my role that was very different from both things I was interested in and my skill set. I had always been kind of a developer working in a customer success group, which meant that, if customers had trouble with our product or they wanted to do more with it, I was someone who came in and kind of figured out the technical bits for them. They were pushing us to move into more of like a sales role or just like a pure customer support role. And neither of those things were particularly appealing to me. There's a whole bunch of things that kind of came together at once, and made it all work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Super interesting. Like everybody's story is a little bit different, and kind of what the components are that kind of end up forcing a decision like that. But that's great. I'm glad you're able to make the leap. When it made sense for you. I'm curious, so you mentioned lifestyle business. I'm super big on that as well. I also would like more leisure, not afraid to admit it, on a podcast. And so I'm curious, like, what's a typical day look like at this point?
Yeah. So it varies a lot, depending on kind of what I'm doing and where I'm at. But there's one thing that's almost always the same. So I have my 5 day a week developer tips newsletter over at gomakethings.com. And so every weekday for me involves, kind of, I guess just gently sliding into the day, eating breakfast, taking the dog for a walk, and then eventually heading up to my office with a cup of coffee where I knock out my article for the day. That's usually somewhere between a 15 and 35-minute process, depending on what I'm writing about for the day. I try to keep those deliberately short, and I don't edit them. It's literally just whatever kind of falls out of my brain that morning. I have a few readers who are always kind enough to point out the typos in my emails, even though they will continue to be there. But other than that, there is no real typical day. So I have a few different modes that I'm in. So sometimes it's course development. So if I'm starting to work on a new course, that usually involves me just pen and paper mapping out what that's going to look like. Just recent example, I've been getting asked for years to create a course on testing vanilla JavaScript. So I finally decided to sit down and do that. And that involves me mapping out, in just like bullet point form. Okay, here are the specific topics I know I want to hit on. And once I kind of get that mapped out, I'm going to open a text editor. I'm going to play around with some stuff. I'm going to poke at the edges and figure out like where are things going to easily break. I want to make sure I cover those things in the course. And then from there, I usually just start kind of putting together some demo examples, because that's a good way for me to figure out, okay, if I was a beginner, like approaching this from scratch, where am I going to get stuck? What are, if I've got something on muscle memory, there's probably some parts in the process that I've forgotten about. So I kind of identify what those are. Then I usually shift into creation mode. And so that involves opening up Sublime Text and writing a whole bunch of words. So all of my courses start off as book format, where I will write up step by step kind of all the different things. And that varies based on, if it's a thing like testing, there's like a kind of a process involved there. If I was doing a course on, say, DOM manipulation, that's not necessarily like you do these things, and it's more, here's a bunch of methods and APIs and how you might use them for different things. But the process is for me ultimately the same. It's create the ebook, and those are markdown files. Then I usually have my recording days. So once I've got the book ironed out, I don't read them like verbatim as a script, but I use them as like rough notes for what I'm going to talk about. So recording days are, I fire up ScreenFlow, I open kind of the demo files that I've put together for the book, and I just talk through them kind of in the same order as in the book. And then the process kind of repeats. So then, I'll once the whole thing's completed, it gets pushed out to my student portal, wherever the place is that I'm marketing it. So if it's like my just self-paced stuff, it's vanillajsguides.com. If it's a new workshop, that's over at vanillajsacademy.com. And then the cycle kind of repeats. I usually have some in-between periods where I'm just kind of thinking. I don't really know a better way to describe it. And that usually involves a lot of I guess you'd call it leisure time, but so I have ADHD, and that means my brain is never not thinking about things, because I, as much as I love leisure, I get bored just doing it. So my brain is just this constant lottery ball machine of ideas bouncing all over the place. And so for me, I take a lot of walks, I go on hikes, I go for swims. And when I'm doing those things, I'm usually thinking about stuff, kind of what I could do next, or the next thing I kind of want to turn my attention to. The one exception to that is a few months ago, when things were kind of seemed like the world had moved on from the pandemic, but we necessarily hadn't. But we hadn't been on a vacation in 2 years, and we were feeling a little like cooped up. So we bought a camper. Literally, like the week I quit my job, we bought a camper, and I'm like, well, this is a little nerve wracking, because we just, like I'm trying to save money, but I just spent a bunch of money on a camper. But we took it on this huge like East Coast trip from Massachusetts down to Florida and back. So this has kind of become an obsession of mine now. It's just this like road trip travel. And so, we have been doing a lot more of that as well. And I don't really have much time to think about work when I'm doing that because I'm just exploring all these cool places and seeing stuff. And so we've spent a lot of time this summer just on the road. And the intent is, I think, eventually that we'll get to a place where I am also working from the road. But I haven't quite hit the right cadence for that yet. So yeah, I'll have these weeks where just nothing gets done. And I have a lifestyle business, so I can do that.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I think, just that freedom to take off, or, we're working this week, maybe we're not working the next week because we're traveling. I think that's great. So, kudos there. I'm curious if we could nerd out for just a sec.
Please.
So you talked about the process a little bit, but I'm curious about the role of automation, because I was half expecting you to say that you maybe batch write the newsletter and then schedule it. My co-host Aaron writes on LinkedIn, and he writes all at once. Hope I'm not spoiling that, Aaron. He writes on Fridays and then schedules it for the next week. Yeah. And so do you do everything manually, where it's like post and then you like copy paste into email? Like, what's it look like behind the scenes?
No, I'm super heavily automated, but I don't batch because I actually think it's easier to write every day than to put it off and try to write a whole bunch at once. Just for me, I've found that if I do it every day, it's this habit and it's really easy. If I try to do a bunch of them at once, it's like this huge slog and I get like super drained. The one exception is if I'm going on vacation, I will sometimes batch a bunch of emails for the week and let them just kind of work themselves out. When I took that 3-week road trip, I didn't do that. And on week 2, I started getting all these emails from subscribers who were like, "Are you okay? I haven't heard from you in a week. I'm getting nervous." But yeah, so my process is, so I use Hugo, static site generator, and I have it set up so that I have some automated deploy kind of continuous integration thing. Whenever I push to Git, it rebuilds the site. And I also have a cron task that runs every day at 10:30 that pulls the latest version from Git and runs a fresh build. So if anything new has happened, or if there's some sort of scheduled post that wasn't due to go live and now is, that'll publish. So what I do is every email starts off as a markdown file, which is awesome because I have so many code snippets in my stuff that trying to hard code that in like a traditional email editor would be a nightmare. So I push that out. Git add, git commit, git push. And then I have I use ConvertKit for my newsletter. They have, like Drip and MailChimp also have this, but they have an RSS to email feature. So every time the RSS feed updates, ConvertKit grabs the newest thing from it and turns it into an email for me.
Very cool.
Which is awesome. And so whether I write them the day of or batch them, they all get sent out. I've taken mine a step further. Since you wanted to nerd out, we can go into this because I automate a lot. And so there's a few pieces to my automation process. One of them is so there's a few pieces here. The nice thing about having them start off as an article means that every email is shareable. So the biggest kind of source of list growth for me is people sharing my stuff. Sometimes they forward the email along. Every email has like a, like this, here's a copy on the web kind of thing, so people can share it on Twitter or their favorite social media site. And at the bottom of every article is a form for people to sign up to my newsletter. So it kind of creates this nice little cycle there. I actually have 2 RSS feeds. My regular one for my website for just normal, that's the discoverable one. And then I have this second RSS feed just for ConvertKit. And I use that one because when people buy my stuff, they also get tagged based on what they've purchased. And I have calls to action at the bottom of every email that are customized to the things they've already bought. So if you bought one course, you might get recommended, like here's a bundle, you can save a bunch of money, expand your learning into the other things. If they purchased a bundle, I might recommend a workshop. If they purchased my entry-level workshop, I might recommend my advanced workshop. If they haven't purchased anything, I might recommend, a course. A few weeks ago, I realized that, if someone bought, let's say, one course, and then they never bought a bundle, they would be suggested the bundle forever, for all time. And maybe they don't want any more courses. Maybe they want a workshop. So it occurred to me that I should probably switch it up a little bit, because eventually your eyes just like glaze over. So I added this additional feature to my Hugo build, which is my static site generator of choice, that every week rotates out what that CTA will be based on the thing they've already purchased. So let's say you've purchased one course. Week 1, you're going to get suggested a bundle. Week 2, you're going to get suggested a workshop. Week 3, you're going to get no product at all. It's going to say, hey, did you like this? I'd love if you would forward it to a friend. It would be like a big help for me. And then week 4, I might say, hey, if you've been enjoying these, is there anything else you'd like to learn about? What sort of thing should I write about next? And then it starts all over again. And I just have some fancy like Modolo math kind of behind the scenes, figuring that all out. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I also have, because I'm like a super, super nerd, I have, like my own like little JSON based API on my site. So I have a bunch of YAML files and some date checks. So when I run sales, even more kind of special calls to action kick in the newsletter and on my websites. So Hugo, when it builds this special JSON file for me by checking some start and end dates, and if the date is between kind of the two parameters, the current date, I'll get these messages like, 30% off on my courses right now. Use this code at checkout, and that'll get added in all these places for me. Because I have like maybe a dozen websites I manage. I've got gomakethings.com, vanillajsguides.com, and vanillajsacademy.com for the workshops. But then I have all these other little like one-off sites, leanweb.dev for this like talk I've given before, and the vanillajstoolkit.com where I've got a bunch of Vanilla.js resources, all these kind of like freebies and marketing sites and things I've created. And I used to have to go and like manually update those with these marketing messages every time, and it was taking like literally hours. So I have a very automated business at this point, which I don't recommend to people when they're just starting out, but as your business matures, it almost becomes a necessity if you're just one person, because otherwise you just couldn't manage it all.
Right. Yeah. You build up systems over time. I think that makes sense. I'm curious, just on the tech side, is your course platform also Hugo? Like, is everything kind of standardized?
Yeah. So it's funny you bring this up, because literally just this morning before our talk, I was building a second platform because I'm spinning up this new kind of subscription thing that won't fit into the existing platform I have. But so my platform is bespoke. It is Hugo with a headless WordPress backend for managing like usernames and passwords and things like that. And I like WordPress primarily because they've figured out like they've got a lot of utility functions built in for some of the stuff that I don't want to deal with, like properly encrypting and storing passwords in a database and things like that. And then they are also extremely extendable. So I can build, API hooks for a lot of these processes without actually having to force my users into a WordPress front end. Not that WordPress is bad, but in my experience on the cheap shared hosting that I use, it can be a little slow. And so by like not having that be the front end, I can speed things up a little bit. So yeah, I've got this thing where Hugo generates all of the routes. So my entire app, or my entire student portal, is a multi-page app with hard page reloads for all of the different things. And then on each page that loads, there's an API call that happens to this WordPress API to return back some content that gets injected into the page based on whether you have access to it or not. Couple of other small details about that. Hugo actually renders the JSON files for the content. So I create all of the content for any particular lesson or book in Markdown. It gets saved into a JSON file that lives on my server in only the server can access it. It's not publicly viewable kind of file. And then WordPress will read the file, send it back as an API call if the person has access to it, checking, are they logged in? Have they purchased this thing? Yes, cool. Here you go. And then because that could potentially be a performance issue if someone's calling this API over and over and over again every time they view a page, I use service workers to cache a lot of stuff for an hour or two. It also provides some nice fallbacks if they happen to go offline. It's just become this really nice thing where I have a lot of control over the user experience, and I can bolt new products into it really easily, and it loads absurdly fast. It's ridiculous how quick this whole thing is, and it also provides me with a really nice authoring experience. One of the other things I figured out how to do is so I have these workshops that content is dripped out. So they're not self-paced. It's you log in Monday through Friday, and every day there's a new lesson and a new project to work on. And, so I've got this system where it's automatically dropping, okay, here's your lessons for today. And I've now got that set up that if I run the same workshop multiple times, I just change the start and end date, and the system will, kind of run it again and drip it all out again. And it works out really, really nice. Sorry, I probably went too into the weeds, but I do like nerding out over tech.
No, that's great. That's exactly where I was hoping we'd go. So yeah, super interesting. I don't know that I've met anyone yet that has a headless WordPress setup, but super interesting to hear about how you've used it. Interesting you mentioned how fast the sites are, because that's one of the things I noticed. And especially after reading your writing about all the advantages of vanilla.js, then I really started to notice it. But yeah, that really stood out. And so I think that might be a good gateway into maybe discussing some of your ideas. So you mentioned NPAs, multi-page applications. You had a daily newsletter in February, and the title was a little bit spicy, which I like. It said SPAs were a mistake. And so I'm curious if you remember that one, and if you do, if you might mind sharing some of the concepts kind of behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely one of my more shared articles. So, so the big thesis here is that single page apps or SPAs, they're kind of like this big thing in our industry. They're used for so many things, and the argument for them is that they produce a more native-like experience. So just for anybody who's listening to this who's not familiar, the way an SPA works is you have a single HTML file for your entire app, and all of the page loads that happen after the initial one are JavaScript driven. Sometimes they require an API call, sometimes they don't. But the idea is if someone changes their view, rather than having to reload a different HTML file for that view, you're just updating the one you've already got. The argument here is, well, you're not reloading any of your CSS, you're not reloading most of the JavaScript, if they lose their internet connection, you can still change things because it's the same index, the same HTML file. You're not trying to get a new one. Those arguments are true, except when they're not. So here's the thing with SPAs. I think the core of it for me, why I think they're bad. The browser gives you a bunch of stuff for free, built right in out of the box, and then SPAs break all of that and then force you to recreate it all with JavaScript. So for example, some things that browsers do for you that you need to do yourself with an SPA. Determine if the link that was clicked points to a current site or an external location. If it's a current site, match that URL path against some content that you want to show. If the content is API driven, get it with a fetch request. Update the URL and browser history without triggering a page reload, which can be done, but has some nuance to it. Render the content onto the page. If there's an anchor link in the URL, scroll to that anchored element. Shift focus to either the top of the document or the anchored element. And this is where most SPAs really start to get things wrong, and it creates tons of accessibility issues. Announce that the page has loaded or the content has changed for screen readers. Again, many SPAs get this wrong. And so if you're a visually impaired user using a screen reader, you're going to have no idea that anything has changed. And if the scripts you're running rely on specific DOM structure or attached to specific elements, you need to then reinitialize a bunch of scripts. You also need to detect when the user clicks the browser's forward or backward button and repeat all of those steps in response. And so pretty much all of this stuff is done for you by browsers with a traditional kind of multi-page app, or what I would just call a website. Some of it is easy, some of it's complicated and nuanced or easy to get wrong. And it all adds a lot of code to your site. And so as a result, we end up building things that are fragile and easily broken. And we have to throw a lot more code at the front end. We get this improved user experience when things line up perfectly, and then a bunch of edge case situations where the UX ends up being much, much worse. And so my argument is that our users in many cases are actually better served by having each view be its own HTML file that gets loaded the old-fashioned way. There's some instances where that's not the case, but I think a lot of times a traditionally loaded web page is actually better for the user. I feel a little vindicated because in the last few years, Google has started saying that this is the case as well. They have a whole section over on their web.dev website about multi-page apps and how they're actually a really good thing. So yeah, that's my big thesis, that we should stop reinventing the wheel and just let browsers do their thing. And so kind of the follow-up to that article was about how I build multi-page apps that are as fast as single-page apps, which we can unpack if you want, but I want to pause because I will just go forever like a juggernaut if I don't breathe for a second and give you some chance to ask questions if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only comment from me is just even taking one of those topics, right? So, for example, episode 40 of this podcast, we had Maria Lamardo on, who's head of accessibility engineering at CBS, and I was asking her what's some low-hanging fruit that engineering teams can implement for accessibility. And she mentioned just using semantic HTML, which of course is built into the browser. The browser has all this accessibility stuff built in. And so, yeah, I mean, kind of what I hear from what you're saying is that a lot of this has been done and solved already by the browser. And if you use what's baked in, then everything's a lot better. And browsers are getting better. And so why not just lean on that instead of reinventing the wheel?
Yeah. So it's a little thing, right? But if you update the browser's content by fetching it with, an API call and then injecting into the UI. If I am a screen reader user, someone who's visually impaired, when that new content gets injected into the UI, I have no idea that that's happened unless you do something to let me know. And if if I happen to have already been scrolled down on the page and when that happens, I can end up tucked in the middle of a page somewhere. And when I navigate to the next focusable element, something's going to get announced to me. And I'm going to be really confused because I'll have had no idea what's going, I have no idea what the current state of the UI is. If that were a traditionally loaded, you click a link, the new HTML file opens kind of thing, screen readers automatically announce, page loaded and the title of the current page that you're looking at. So it's a small thing, but it's right in there. The browser just handles that for you. And so there are so many little things like that SPAs often get wrong. Never mind kind of the annoyance of trying to match link paths against kind of things you're trying to load and so on. There's a lot of layers to this onion, if it were. And so people end up using tools, and those tools end up being pretty complex. And it then just introduces all this extra code, which then slows down. Like, it's one of these things we're very okay having an initial app take several seconds to load for this perceived, well, it'll be faster for all these subsequent page loads. And you can make those subsequent page loads just as fast without this big hit for the initial page load by changing the way you build things. So if you want, I can talk about some of my, how I do this. We don't have to, but I certainly can if you're interested.
No, I think that's a logical follow-up, and I think the process is actually pretty interesting. If I remember correctly, you had another newsletter, I think, that basically said, does this mean that you're building a mini framework for every project? And then I think that might be the same post where you talk about your process. So I'm curious, how do you go about building, MPAs with no framework, relying on the browser, as we just mentioned?
Yeah. So no, you absolutely do not have to build your own mini framework for everything. For me, it's a handful of techniques. So I serve pre-rendered, mostly static HTML. That one is absolutely huge. And I can talk about any of these in detail, but these are kind of the five big ones for me. So the HTML already exists before the user calls it. So if you're using something like WordPress, every time the user visits a page, WordPress is generating that HTML file on the fly. I don't do that. The HTML file is already there. You ask for it, the server just sends it right back. I inline everything, including my CSS and JavaScript. We can talk about why that matters. I use mostly platform native JavaScript and as little of it as possible. I minify and gzip everything, and I lean very heavily on service workers. So Peter, if you want, I can just kind of start working through the list, or we can kind of jump around depending on what you think makes more sense.
Yeah, no, I think all those would be super interesting. So maybe just starting from the top.
Perfect. All right. So so the static HTML thing. I run all of my sites on a single cheap shared $5 a month server. And so I don't know. Are you old enough to remember when sites used to get fireballed? Daring Fireball would reference a site and then it would crash because the server would get overloaded with all the page requests.
Not familiar with Fireball, but familiar with the concept.
Yeah. So this was a big thing back when Daring Fireball, who was an Apple pundit, was a really big thing, and everybody was enamored with Steve Jobs. And because dynamically generated websites generate each HTML file on the fly, they use a lot of server resources, and it can be kind of slow unless you have a lot of server power behind them. But with a static HTML file, when someone types in a URL and the browser says, I want this file, the server literally just grabs it and sends it back. And it's a really, really fast process that dramatically lowers the time to first byte response from the server. So that's how long it takes the server to start sending stuff back. So you're already way ahead of the game just by doing that. The second piece of this is that when browsers start getting stuff back from the server, they grab that content in 14 kilobyte chunks. So for example, if you have a 250 kilobyte image, you're going to get 18 small packets of data sent one at a time. 17 of them about 14 kilobytes in size, and then another not quite 12 kilobyte one. They get broken up into smaller parts. And each HTTP request adds a little bit of latency to the request or the rendering process, as browsers and servers have to do these little handshake dances with them. My HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all so small, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, that their combined weight is often under 14 kilobytes. So if I inline the CSS and JavaScript and HTML or all the content all into one file instead of using external CSS and JavaScript files, everything the browser needs to start rendering gets sent in a single HTTP request. And so that means time to first byte, you get that file back. The browser looks at it, goes, yep, I have everything I need, and then immediately starts rendering. like I've had people be like, your page feels like it loads instantly, and it kind of does because of this. That's enhanced by the fact that because I use mostly platform native or vanilla JavaScript, and as little of it as possible, my JS tends to be really, really tiny. I'm not loading 30 kilobytes of library to do things like if I had jQuery or React or something like that. Like I know people always say jQuery or React, let me write less code. And it's like, it does that because you're preloading 30 kilobytes minified and gzipped of other code first. And so if I cut that out, even if I have to write a little bit more code myself, the overall JavaScript bundle is really, really small. And then gzipping is this form of zipping that you use on the web, the same way you might compress a file on your computer, that can shave up to 70% off of a file size. So the thing that gets sent ends up being really small, and the browser unpacks it. So if I had a 30 kilobyte file, HTML file with everything inlined, after gzipping, I'm bad at math, so let me multiply that. That ends up being 9 kilobytes. So that's a single HTTP request, and you get it back instantly. So super, super awesome. And then service workers are like a really important part of this process too. So any files I have that are heavier in nature, I use service workers to cache them and load them from cache instead of the network wherever appropriate. So my student portal, the biggest kind of bundle there tends to be API calls. And so I will cache those for an hour or two for certain, for content, so that instead of making the same call over and over again, they get it the first time and then it's loaded instantly after that. This would all be completely ridiculous to try and do by hand. And this is where having something like a static site generator, whether it's Hugo or Eleventy, is awesome as well. That allows you to automate some of this stuff. In particular, the inlining becomes really, really easy with a static site generator. That can make your life a lot easier. And that's a super critical part of this process for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a typical, let's say you're spinning up a new project. It sounds like you're probably going to be starting with Hugo and not necessarily just here's a blank HTML file and a blank, JavaScript file.
I'm usually copy pasting an existing project and modifying it rather than trying to just start with an empty HTML file. In particular, I've done this enough times now that I really just kind of have this, I kind of have this process. I'll go and I'll copy paste, I'll delete all the existing content except for the main index file, or index.markdown, I guess is technically the correct term in the static site generator, and then modify as needed. So in my case, I'm super lazy, and all of my sites use the same CSS, which, I have kind of this collection of CSS on my computer that they all import from using some build process, but not always. Sometimes I'll modify that too and go from there.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Well, Chris, this has been great. I want to respect your time, but I'm curious, kind of as we're wrapping up, if you might have maybe one piece of advice or wisdom for our audience out there. Maybe let's say they're convinced, or maybe they're on the fence about, I need to really invest in my foundational JavaScript knowledge. What would you say to them?
Yeah. So, that's a great question. So for me, one of the things we didn't really super get into, but just kind of at a high level, the thing with foundational JavaScript is it can produce a much better experience for your users. But even if you have a project where, a library or something else is an appropriate choice, because I'm not anti-library. I want us to be more thoughtful about when we use them. Having that foundational knowledge can allow you to choose the tools you use more thoughtfully and author in them more effectively. And so, I've had tons of students that have come to me having had a tough time learning React, for example, and been like, I don't even know if I'm like cut out for this. And then they learn vanilla JS and they go back to React and they're like, oh, wow, that was a lot easier, because so much of what these libraries do is vanilla JavaScript with some stuff sprinkled on top of it. And if you understand kind of that foundational part, the sprinkled on top of it stuff starts to make a lot more sense. If you'd like to learn more about this, head over to gomakethings.com. If you actually go to gomakethings.com/develop yourself, I've put together a whole bunch of tools and resources and other articles based on all of the stuff that Peter and I talked about today.
That sounds great. Well, Chris, this has been incredible. Thanks so much for taking the time. And to the audience, we will see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today. Thanks so much to Chris for coming on. Chris's links are in the show notes, and I also wanted to mention a few shameless plugs. Parsity is at parsity.io, and Parsity has a new cohort kicking off on October 17th. So go ahead and click the link below if you're interested in checking it out and maybe applying. My YouTube channel is at youtube.com/PeterElbaum. And I also just released a new course on Udemy called Junior to Senior. It's all about how to go from an entry-level developer to a senior developer by leveling yourself up and doing a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast, like developing yourself, developing your skills, etc. I have coupon codes for the listeners of this podcast, which are embedded in the link. So if you're interested in checking this course out, just go to the link below and you will get it for free. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.